She stood there under the silvery hum of a Piccadilly morning, waiting for her coffee, unaware that beneath her polished boots and the clink of espresso cups, a different kind of temple once stood. Not a temple to caffeine, but to myth, mystery, and memory. Egyptian Hall, they called it. A sandstone curiosity with sphinxes for sentinels, obelisks for columns, and hieroglyphs instead of hashtags. Built in 18, demolished in 1905, and now replaced by glass and logos. The girl takes her coffee, checks her phone, and walks away, never knowing she just stood on the bones of a lost civilization. This is London, a city that builds and forgets. Behind the flickering theater signs of Charing Cross Road, a concert hall once pulsed with music so electric it left the walls humming until dawn. Where the roar of the crowd once rose like a tide, there's now a quiet corridor of commuters. Further west, the shadows of an Egyptian-inspired palace are now buried beneath concrete and commercial ambition. And high above the old Thames embankment, where steel once defied gravity, Churchill's decree erased a vision of the future in the name of order. We walk through London thinking we see the whole story. But we don't walk through London, we walk over it. This is not just a tale of bricks and stone. This is about identity, wonder, and what happens when a city trades memory for momentum. London doesn't just lose buildings, it loses landmarks of its soul, temples to possibility, altars to community, monuments to eccentricity. Take the Euston Arch, not merely a train station gateway, but a triumphal portal into the age of steam. Raised in 1837, it stood proud and unnecessarily grand, with fluted Doric columns echoing the Parthenon and ambitions just as lofty. Imagine being a Victorian traveler, soot in the air, steam hissing, the scent of coal and sweat and anticipation, all framed by this grand archway. It wasn't functional, really, but that was the point. It was theatrical. It told you, this is no ordinary journey. You are entering the machine age. And for over a century, it stood its post. Then came 1962, and with it, a commission hungry for modernity. The British Transport Commission deemed the arch an obstacle to progress. Its sandstone blocks weren't even preserved, just dumped unceremoniously in the River Lee. No ceremony, no farewell, just gone. Today, a gray road curls towards Euston Station. The same site that once welcomed millions now greets you with roundabouts and shadows. The arch remains only in faded photographs, the margins of architectural books, and the aching hearts of those who knew what was lost. And what of the Great Wheel? Before the London Eye ever blinked into existence, the skyline was pierced by another giant. Built for the 1900 Empire Exhibition, the Great Wheel rose 308 feet above Earl's Court, a marvel of iron and imagination inspired by Chicago's Ferris wheel. It was an age of spectacle, an age of dreams powered by steam and rivets. Over 1,000 passengers could ride its orbit, watching the city stretch out like a map below them. But dreams, like machines, need maintenance. And money. By 1920, the Great Wheel had spun its last. Scrapped, sold for parts. Not even its bolts remain on site. Now, where once a generation dreamed skyward, there's just the hum of traffic and the occasional memory of a wheel that dared to lift London into the clouds. The city grew taller, but something was lost in that rise, something unmeasurable. The ability to marvel not for profit, not for brand, but for sheer possibility. What did we trade away for the convenience we enjoy now? You may know London, you may live in it, but beneath your feet is another city, ghostly, forgotten, and full of stories buried beneath cappuccinos and crossroads. Long before the word Soho became synonymous with neon lights and late-night bites, London's original Chinatown was hidden in the fog of Limehouse, a pocket of the East End laced with salt air, coal smoke, and the sense of strange spices. It wasn't a tourist destination, it was real. Built not on novelty, but necessity. By the late 1800s, Limehouse had become home to Chinese sailors, cooks, and merchants. Men who had crossed oceans aboard British steamers and found, on the fringes of empire, a place to lay anchor. Here, among narrow lanes and weather-worn tenements, they opened tea houses with curled dragon handles, pharmacies lined with fragrant roots, and laundries that ran late into the night. To Victorian Londoners, it was exotic and dangerous. To the Chinese, it was sanctuary. This Chinatown wasn't made of red lanterns and fusion menus. It was forged from hardship, a response to exclusion, to foreignness. It was misunderstood, too often villainized in penny dreadfuls and lurid headlines. Authors like Sax Rohmer peddled tales of opium dens and oriental menace, turning a living community into a backdrop for fear. But beneath the sensationalism was something quietly noble, a culture that resisted erasure through the simple acts of daily life: boiling tea, folding dumplings, lighting incense at a family altar. But war has a way of washing clean. During the Blitz, Limehouse was hit hard. German bombs rained down on the docks, and with them, on a culture already fragile. What the Luftwaffe began, urban planners finished. After the war, Limehouse was rebuilt, reimagined, rewritten. And by the 1950s, most of the Chinese population had moved westward, settling in what we now call Soho. The old streets were widened, the signs replaced, the stories softened, if not forgotten. And then there were the Twin Towers of Wembley. Not the steel arch we see today, but two bright, blocky sentinels that watched over Britain's greatest sporting glories. Built in 1923 in just 300 days, the old Wembley Stadium was a marvel of imperial confidence. Its towers weren't merely architectural. They were emotional. They held echoes of the 1966 World Cup, of Olympic victories, of crowds singing in unison like a single enormous heartbeat. It wasn't just where sport happened, it was where memory gathered. But nostalgia doesn't sign contracts. In 2003, the towers fell, demolished to make way for the slicker, sharper stadium that now occupies the site. Its features are modern, its soul perhaps less so. Something unquantifiable disappeared when those towers came down. A kind of magic you can't replicate with better Wi-Fi or executive boxes. Architecture is never neutral. It carries meaning. It reflects us back to ourselves. And when we erase it, we do more than clear space. We clear memory. What happens when a city edits its own past? In the year 1940, under a sky that growled with the drone of Luftwaffe bombers, a different kind of ruin unfolded in the heart of London. Not born of time, but of fire. Holland House, once a mansion of regal poise and political power, stood near Kensington High Street like a dowager duchess cloaked in ivy. For centuries, it had hosted whispers of empire. Tories in wigs debating policy, poets scribbling verse by candlelight, foreign dignitaries raising their brows at English eccentricity. It was a house of salons, not swords, where conversation ruled the room. Its libraries brimmed with ideas. Its gardens carried the scent of elderflower and empire. To enter its rooms was to feel time stretch, to hear echoes of enlightenment bound. But all it took was a single night of bombs. 22 incendiaries fell in one raid. Brick crumbled like biscuit. Timber snapped like old bone. The roof was devoured by flame, the walls blackened and left hollow. In mere hours, a place that once resonated with laughter and legacy became a scorched silhouette. Some of its outer structure remains, preserved in quiet reverence inside Holland Park. A shell, a whisper, a question. And yet, the loss was not just material. It was intellectual, emotional, symbolic. Holland House had been one of the few great homes to bridge class and culture, power and poetry. Its destruction was not merely a casualty of war. It was a wound to the very idea of a London that balanced grandeur with thought. Just over a decade later, a very different kind of monument rose beside the Thames. The year was 1951, and Britain, bruised, rationed, rebuilding, needed hope. And so the Festival of Britain was born, a great act of national optimism. Its icon, a sleek, silvery spear named the Skylon. The Skylon didn't touch the ground. It floated, suspended midair, held by cables that defied logic and gravity. At 300 feet tall, it wasn't a building. It was a symbol of science, of modernity, of rebirth. It declared, "We are no longer the empire of coal and colonies. We are the nation of the future." And the public believed it. Children pointed skyward in wonder. Couples kissed beneath its glow. Photographers angled their lenses to capture its grace. It was unlike anything Britain had seen. But dreams are dangerous things, especially when they float too high. Winston Churchill, returning to power, reportedly despised the Skylon. To him, it was labor's fantasy, frivolous, foreign. In 1952, barely a year after it rose, he ordered its removal. It wasn't stored, it wasn't archived, it was cut up, melted down, and sold for scrap. A nation's totem of optimism reduced to molten memory. Today, on the South Bank, where it once shimmered, there's nothing. No plaque, no shadow, just wind. Standing not far from the Skylon during that brief, shining moment of 1951 was another marvel. The Dome of Discovery. A perfect hemisphere of modern engineering, it was the largest dome in the world at the time, dwarfing even St. Paul's. But this dome didn't look to the heavens for its authority. It looked forward, boldly, into the stars and the sea, housing exhibits on space exploration, atomic science, deep-sea wonders, a temple not of religion but of reason. Children walked inside and found the future. It smelled of new paint, electrified circuits, and the faint scent of popcorn from outdoor vendors. It promised a nation reeling from war that life could begin again. Better, brighter, more just. But its time was as fragile as the paper models in its classrooms. Like the Skylon, the dome was demolished in 1952. Too idealistic, too temporary, too left-wing for the new government. In its place, a car park. A cruel irony. Progress paved over by practicality. How many futures have we buried beneath parking lots? And then we travel further back, to an even older wonder. Before the eye, before the wheel, before the gherkin, there stood a structure so luminous, so audacious, it was called a palace. Not of kings, but of crystal. The Crystal Palace, born of the Great Exhibition of 1851, was a cathedral of iron and glass, the very image of Victorian pride and ingenuity. It housed exhibitions of invention, culture, and global conquest. The scent of wax-polished floors mixed with whiffs of Indian spices, African drums, and Australian ferns. It was the empire under glass. Breathtaking, absurd, extraordinary. After the exhibition, the palace was moved to Sydenham Hill, expanded, and became a cultural mecca. Concerts, lectures, exhibitions. But time and neglect crept in like rot. In 1936, fire swallowed it whole. Locals described the flames as visible from 8 counties away. Thousands gathered to watch it burn, like mourners at a pyre for Britain's youthful optimism. What wasn't destroyed by war or fire was often cleared in the name of order. Near the Strand, there once ran a crooked old street, winding like a forgotten thought, a relic of Elizabethan London. Tudor facades, leaning balconies, timber soaked with centuries of fog and laughter. Playwrights and politicians once drank together in its crooked pubs, and it's said ghost stories were born there, whispered beside flickering lanterns. But in 1901, the city had other plans. The street was demolished to make way for Aldwych and Kingsway, part of a grand Edwardian reworking of the capital. It was called improvement, but what was lost was more than architecture. It was atmosphere, memory, a sense of time lingering in the very walls. We measure history in wars and kings, but maybe we should measure it in streets we can no longer walk. Lanes that vanish not with explosions, but with signatures and surveys. And yet, the shadows remain. A basement arch here, a misaligned wall there. The city resists forgetting, even as it is told to forget. What if the most precious things aren't just in museums, but in what we once walked past without even noticing? Not all ghosts in London wear cloaks of centuries. Some still echo in living memory, through music, smoke, and neon lights. The London Astoria was one of them. Nestled near Tottenham Court Road, its walls once pulsed with the lifeblood of modern British music. Originally a cinema in the 1920s, it transformed across decades into a theater, then a nightclub, and finally a legendary concert venue. Here, the air was thick with sweat, beer, and bass lines. Generations saw their first gigs here. from indie newcomers to titans like the Rolling Stones and Radiohead. It was chaotic, intimate, electric. But in 2009, the Astoria met the same fate as so many before it. Demolished, not for fire or war, but for Crossrail, that great artery of the modern age. A high-speed line for a faster city. And yet, what replaced the Astoria could never match the feeling of walking into that room, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, unified by a single guitar riff and the flicker of stage lights. Not all progress is musical. Some losses are quieter, more elegant, but no less profound. At the corner of Poultry and Queen Victoria Street once stood the Mappin and Webb Building, a jewel of the Victorian commercial age. Completed in 1870, it rose in full neo-Gothic glory. Spires, pointed arches, carvings so delicate they look like lace in stone. Inside, London's most prestigious jewelers glittered behind polished glass, while outside, the building gleamed like a cathedral to commerce. It was, in many ways, the city's self-portrait, a symbol of wealth, taste, and stability. But stability is an illusion in a city that rewrites itself every generation. In 994, the Mappin and Webb building was demolished. Its replacement? Number 1 Poultry, a postmodern slab of pink limestone and sharp geometry, bold to some, blasphemous to others. What did we trade that intricate beauty for? Efficiency? Statement? A building easier to maintain? You can still find old photographs of Mappin and Webb, the kind that appears sepia-toned even in color. They show gentlemen in hats, women in gloves, and streets where horse-drawn carriages still clip-clop, past rows of stone lions and wrought iron. Now the rhythm is faster, sharper, but somehow emptier. These stories of music halls and marvels, of glass cathedrals and stone temples, tell us something larger. That cities are memory machines, but only if we let them be. And when memory is overwritten in the name of speed or style, we lose more than buildings. We lose context, texture, the subtle grip of history that once kept us grounded, even in motion. Yet something always lingers, in street names, in foundations, in the faint echo when a train whooshes past where music once roared. The question isn't whether cities should evolve. Of course they must. But who decides what is worth remembering? And what does that say about us? Walk through London today and you'll find no shortage of stories. But you have to know where to listen. Because the most powerful ones don't shout from rooftops or blaze from neon. They linger. In door frames that lead to nowhere. In alleys that curve without reason. In the silence beneath your feet where music, debate, laughter, and wonder once lived. The city doesn't forget. It remembers in shadows. The Astoria, the Skylawn, the Crystal Palace. These are not just places lost to time. They are pieces of identity, expressions of who we once were, what we once hoped for. They stood for entertainment, for ambition, for empire, for rebellion. And though bulldozers have long cleared the bricks, they remain in photos, in songs, in street-level whispers passed from one memory to another. These buildings were not static. They pulsed with life. They evolved with the people. They carried meaning until that meaning was deemed expendable, until the march of efficiency flattened their histories into convenience. There's a strange kind of grief that comes with urban progress, not violent or immediate, but quiet and cumulative. You feel it most when you visit a corner you haven't walked in years. Something feels off. You can't name it at first. Then you remember, wasn't there a little pub here with wood so worn it gleamed like honey? Wasn't there a music venue, a bookstore, a crooked building that used to lean just so? And there wasn't just a building, there was a feeling. That's what's so hard to reclaim. The soul of a city is not in its skyline, it's in its street corners, in its imperfections, in the warmth of brick that holds a century of sun, in laughter that still echoes through stones long since demolished. Cities evolve. They must. But perhaps we need to ask harder questions about what we preserve and why. Not every building can be saved, but every story can be told. Because memory, unlike concrete, does not need planning permission. It just needs a voice, a camera, a listener. So the next time you walk through London, or any city, stop. Look around. Ask yourself, what used to be here? What rhythm once danced through these stones? And how much of that rhythm still beats beneath the silence? Because in the end, the question isn't just, what did we lose? It's, what did we choose to forget? But that's not the whole story, not even close. Because beneath every Starbucks and station, every shimmering glass tower, there are still secrets, still echoes, still more stories to be unearthed. But that is for another time.